Hello folks, welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show. This is Tony coming to you from New Zealand. Sorry it's been a while since I've put any videos out or any shows. I've just recently moved house and district, and it's been a big setup change. In fact, this is my first test recording of my new room, which I haven't even had a chance to put sound deadening up or anything yet. So if it sounds a little bit echoey or whatever, you know why. I'm still in the process of sorting it all out. So without any further ado, I will introduce my guest, which is John Haller. And most of you will know John since I've had him on the show many times, and I always enjoy having John on the show. So I'm sure today's discussion will be a really good one as well. So welcome, John.
Good to be with you again, Tony.
Yes, it's been a while, much longer than normal, but yep, we are here. So what have you got on the agenda to share today, John?
Well, it seems like this is the world which, and I can't remember, I think it was, it might have been Lenin or somebody who said, you know, there are, what's the old saying? There are decades when years happen and there are years when decades happen, or something along that line. And I also remember that line from one of the Hemingway novels where the person, and I think this sort of relates to Bible prophecy because I talk a lot about convergence and acceleration, and the one character says to another, "Oh, how did you go bankrupt?" And the guy goes, "Well, I went bankrupt in two ways, gradually, then suddenly." And I think that's sort of a picture of how this end times prophecy thing unfolds. Is, you know, we have all these markers and signs that are a lot of times very general. So there's a lot of controversy and discussion over exactly how these things are going to play out. But the one thing we know is that they all seem to come about very, very quickly and all gradually, and then they hit all at once. So there's the example would be the and I talked about this in one of my talks. I'm sure people can find online if they Google it, but that when Jesus came the first time, there were a bunch of signs related to his first coming. But interestingly enough, about 59%, 60% of those that were fulfilled at his first coming were fulfilled in that last week, the Passion Week. So I think that it's going to be the same. So we understand that Jewish prophecy is often pattern. So the pattern will be, if that pattern holds, and I have every reason to believe that it will, and it certainly seems like it is that we have all these prophecies, and you're going to start to see sort of a gradual coming together, and then boom, it's going to be this acceleration of all these things happening at once. So I think that's what we need to look at. But there's any number of directions we could go for this, and I know neither one of us sat down and prepared something directly, but let me just bring up a few things that I've been reading a lot about, and I've been preparing some talks for. I have a conference in Canada next spring in Calgary, and it's interesting that 2 years ago I couldn't go. Now I can go because they've dropped all of the restrictions so far. You know, they can always change things on a dime. But the thing that's sort of at the forefront of what concerns me about the world, and I do think it plays into Bible prophecy because it relates to people taking increasingly control over our lives. And we've talked about the World Economic Forum and Davos and that type of thing. And a lot of this is related to that. And I'll go into that in a minute, but this energy thing is very, very concerning. Now, I don't know what the situation is like in New Zealand. Here in the United States, it seems to be okay, although we're starting to hear things about, well, your utility bills are going to go way up and that sort of thing. And then there have been some scattered reports of things. One was last week. I can't remember the podcast I heard it on, but it seems to be true. For example, in northeastern Pennsylvania, which interestingly enough is the area where Joe Biden is originally from, people are calling, there's different ways to heat your home. You have all electric, you have natural gas, and you have there's still a few coal around the United States. We had a coal furnace when I was a kid growing up till I was about 10, and there's heating oil. So people will call. My in-laws used to have they lived out in the country, so they had a fuel tank, and they would fill it up at the beginning of in fall for hopefully to get all the way through the winter without having to be filled up again. But now people in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I suspect this will start happening elsewhere, is that when they call to order a full tank of heating oil, they're told, well, we're only going to sell you half a tank right now. And then if it's available, we'll come back and sell you another half tank at some point. So what's happening is they're not being ordered to ration, but they're rationing on their own. And it's the way things are going. I noticed the other day, I do most of the shopping just so I can kind of keep track of prices and supplies and that type of thing. And we have about 4 or 5 stores that we go to, a couple big warehouse ones, and then some other chains that we go to do shopping. We used to go to Whole Foods on occasionally, but it was always seemed to be overpriced. And they had some really, let's just say, people wouldn't get hired anywhere else. I always viewed that if Whole Foods had full employment of people that looked a little bit odd, then that was a good sign that the economy was doing well. Because when the economy is bad, you don't have to hire people that have 18 body piercings on their face. And I'm not judging that. I'm just saying is that most people just don't like that.
Yeah.
But now they're starting to call it around here as whole paycheck foods, because things are incredibly expensive. I notice myself that things keep getting downsized. So, for example, on the toilet paper, if they make the rolls any narrower, I'm going to be able to put 2 side by side on the holder. And it's so weird. And I think the people that do this at these companies is they act like, well, nobody's going to notice if we just, cut the width of the toilet paper roll in half. But we do. But we have. So then in New England, there's this the main power supplier up there came out and said, we don't know that we're going to have enough natural gas because the Russian gas has been taken out of the market. Europe wants the gas. Other places that we might do spot purchases of gas to keep our supply going. Most of their electricity is generated through natural gas up there. We just can't. We can't guarantee that we won't have like 3 to 4 to 5 hour blackouts every day. In the UK, I think it was the UK. It was one of the countries in Europe. I think it was Germany, actually. They said, well, we're cutting back on natural gas in industry. So all these industries are shutting down. And they say that, we won't be able to generate electricity if we don't have enough gas. So we want to make sure that we have enough gas to heat people's homes, which is kind of an insane thing to say because the way they heat their homes is through a furnace that has an electric fan on it. And the ignition to ignite the gas to run the heater is done electrically also. So how bad is it going to be? And I've heard estimates that there could be 1 million people in Germany die from cold this winter. In Germany. Now, this is one of the most industrialized, well-developed countries. I'm looking at other pictures, particularly in Ukraine, where Russia's destroyed probably about 1/3 of the power plants. So there's very little electricity to go around. And they had an article in the New York Times with pictures of people in these villages, and they have piles and piles and piles of wood because their houses don't have windows because they were blown out. They don't have electricity. And it can get 20 below in Ukraine, in the Ukraine in the winter. That's not uncommon. And so people are laying in huge supplies of wood from buildings that have been destroyed and cutting down trees and that type of thing so they can keep warm this winter. This is one season that we're going through. A lot of times I want to say is, and I've said this, and now people quote me when I'm sort of ranting or complaining or observing that things are just very, very strange. And I come to this conclusion, and they say, well, what did you think the end times were going to look like? And I think that that's a legitimate question at this time. So there's energy problems all over the world. They give you some examples, though, of how that will affect. Now, I'm an attorney, and I have at different times in my career, I've represented farmers. I have a farm bankruptcy case that I'm sort of semi-retired, but I still have a farm bankruptcy case that I'm working on. And of course, the way the seeds have been genetically modified and that type of thing, they really need fertilizer to produce. So in Poland, which is a big agricultural country, they have plants that make fertilizer. But the sort of the key ingredient, the starting ingredient, is natural gas that they need. And in Poland, every company that makes fertilizer has shut down.
Wow.
And I mean every single supplier.
Oh, yeah.
In other countries, like in the Croatias and in the Balkans and other places, 40 to 50% of them have shut down. In Germany and the Netherlands, my understanding is that they are right now producing about 35% of the fertilizer that they would normally be producing at this time of year, which means that if the world gets past a food crisis for this year,
it's going to be
bad next year because crop yields are going to be down.
Yeah.
Add to that in the United States, and I don't know what your weather's been like there. Our weather was pretty good. The crops here, I was talking to a farmer who he's a sort of a banker and a farmer, which is an interesting. They usually go hand in hand. He has about 400 or 500 acres that he farms, and he said, I'm doing better on soybeans than I've ever done. I've been doing this for 30 years. Corn, it looks like it's going to be an all-time record crop too. So that's Northern Ohio. Around here got kind of a late start, but then everything caught up. Not too far from here, there's a guy who does sweet corn and supplies supermarkets all over the Midwest, all the way up to Chicago, all the way out to St. Louis. And they have like 6,000 irrigated acres. And we went over there to buy some one day. It's about an hour drive from here. And it's just an incredible sight to see these farms, like, mile after mile of these hills filled with these giant corn stalks because they irrigate the whole thing. But they said they had all-time record crops there.
Well, that's interesting, yeah. As far as here goes, because we've come out of winter and we're in like mid-spring, was theoretically in just entered the second half of spring. Well, our spring has been so far like all over the place. When I was unpacking here earlier in October, I was unpacking one of my loads in snow flurries, which is a little bit kind of unusual for October. And then, we've sort of had cold snaps quite late, and then it kind of will start to warm up. And then today again, we kind of got another cold day, and then later in the week it's supposed to get hot. So it's kind of all over the place, really. But yes. I'm not sure because there was there's been late frosts and things like that. It would have affected some of the fruit crops. Has to have around the country, right. But who knows what it'll be like, once we get further along. But so we didn't really have an energy problem. We had a couple of warnings in the cold snaps of there could be power outages and things, but to my knowledge there weren't. Like they managed to get by. So we've kind of come out of that going in towards summer, but you guys are hitting the other end. You're in the autumn now, heading into winter, right when the energy crisis is kind of at its worst. So we've kind of, escaped it largely so far, but we've certainly got the inflation of food prices and things. That's definitely very noticeable.
Yeah, I mean, here it's... they take a lot of things. They have a basket of goods that they use to determine inflation, which is usually a basket of goods that the inflation doesn't affect that much. So, for example, fuel energy, gas, is not included in the basket of goods that they use to determine inflation. So that kind of takes a big thing off the table. But the other problem here in the United States, like the western part of the United States, west of the Mississippi, is in various stages of a major drought, particularly when you get down into California, Arizona, Colorado, western Kansas, Nebraska. These are major food producing areas, California and Arizona, because they use irrigation, but they're in 1,000-year or 2,000-year drought. And they think that this could continue for another 3 or 4 years. So some of the major reservoirs are at all-time record lows. Lake Mead, which probably will stay at a certain level because they'll just take it from other reservoirs up the Colorado River. We were in Colorado a year ago, driving up through the Green River Valley, which feeds into the Colorado, which feeds in, to the Hoover Dam and Lake Powell there in Utah, southern Utah, and the Green River Reservoir, which it used to come all the way up to the road. And I would say that the water was a half mile to a mile away from the road, almost all the way, the entire length of the reservoir. It goes for miles and miles up there north of Dillon, Colorado. So you see this evidence. Now, the other thing that's happening is even in the Ohio Valley, and we're sort of on the edge of the Ohio Valley. It must have been 2 months ago, I went down to the Ark Encounter in Kentucky and met my one friend at another friend's house in Cincinnati, who lives right on the river in Kentucky, right across from downtown Cincinnati. And so there's like a road, like there's a front yard, a road, and then there's a place to park one car, and then there's the river. And the river was, I've never seen the river running like that. It was very high. It was running very fast, barges going up and down. But now we get 2 months later, we haven't had a lot of rain since then, all through the Ohio Valley. And the rivers are so low, like in the southern Mississippi, down in the state of Mississippi, they can't move barges. And so barge prices have like doubled in price because it's supply and demand. Riverboat cruises in that part of the Mississippi have been completely canceled.
Well, we certainly haven't been short of rain here. That's the thing. It's been also a wet spring largely, so we've got the opposite. Certainly not got droughts here, but who knows, a summer could bring one. But at this point, we certainly don't have a shortage of water. It's sort of like being, But you guys have got some of the largest water reservoirs, like those lakes, in the world. So when they're down, that's a pretty big thing.
It is. And Lake Mead is a huge reservoir. Lake Powell is a huge reservoir. And they're down. Lake Mead is down. I'm thinking a couple 100 feet from what it was a while ago. Now they still have river, but they've been marginally close to the place where they won't have enough water to use the water intakes for the turbines that generate electricity, which run a lot of Southern California with electricity and Las Vegas and that type of thing. So they'll protect major areas and that sort of thing. But, California had rolling blackouts and, I guess they were able to avoid it this year. People did cut way back, but they're like always teetering on the brink of having rolling blackouts. And so at some point, when does it really hit and when does it really happen? And when I'm telling you, when you take the power out, a lot of things about how society is governed and controlled and operates completely change.
Yes.
And it will cause tremendous, as if we didn't have enough political upheaval already. So that's another thing we can talk about. It seems like everywhere I look, there are major problems politically. So we have huge elections here in the United States in about 2 weeks from tomorrow. The polling seems to be leaning the way of the Republicans. They could take back the House. They could take back the Senate. but they don't take back the executive branch. And so the problems that a lot of us have noticed that are on the conservative side of things, the legal system, particularly the federal system, has been completely weaponized against conservatives. So we had, starting with the George Floyd riots, that started in the cities, started by Black Lives Matter and others, at the Soros-funded groups after the George Floyd thing back in 2020, and have really continued to this day. I don't know of anybody who's really been prosecuted for any of that. I mean, they were literally almost destroying in Portland, Oregon, destroying a federal courthouse or a federal building.
Yeah.
And I don't know of a single person who's been prosecuted over that. But there have been in the last month, well, I'll give you one other example. Since the overturning of the Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood cases, which didn't ban abortion in the United States, they just returned it to the states to decide. And a lot of states are putting restrictions on abortion, even going so far as to ban it. And I think the Democrats wanted to make that a sort of a central election issue for these midterm elections. Don't let the Republicans get in because, boy, you'll really lose all your rights. It just isn't gaining a lot of traction because of inflation, because of things with what's going on in the schools and that sort of thing. So it's, but there's a lot of turmoil. But since that Roe versus Wade decision, there have been about 100, I would call them pregnancy decisions centers. They take in women, they counsel them, and they're pro-life. They don't want a woman to have an abortion. It's pretty clear about that. And there are some, and I know people who run these things, and they do tremendous good work. I mean, they help the woman. If the woman doesn't want to keep the baby, they will find adoption. If the woman wants to keep the baby, they will provide postnatal, post-birth care and some funds and that type of thing to help these women out. They'll get them counseling. They'll help them. And these are tremendous people. There have been about 100 attacks in the United States on those type of clinics, the pro-life pregnancy decision clinics. There's not been a single arrest. There have been clinics that had their own surveillance cameras. The FBI came and got the surveillance footage, and it's never been seen. The FBI won't give it back to them. They say it might be evidence. And not a single prosecution of anyone. But over the last month, there have been, I don't know what the number is, 35 or 40 individuals charged with violations of what's known as the SAFE Act here in the United States. The SAFE Act allows people to, they're supposed to give them safe access to abortion clinics. So there are pro-abortion or pro-life people that go down and they do what they call sidewalk counseling. Sometimes they sing hymns. Sometimes they sit by these abortion clinics and they try to counsel women. They pray, they sing, that type of thing. It has kind of a real Christian gospel, share the gospel orientation thing to it. Well, under the Biden administration now, probably above 30 individuals have been charged with felony violations of the SAFE Act, which carry a prison term of up to 11 years in prison. And I've seen the videos of these people in one, I think it was in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Well, maybe it was, I don't know, it was either Philadelphia or Buffalo. They were sitting in a hallway singing, but the women could still come and go. But they did have to go past people who were trying to convince them otherwise. But nobody was physically barring them from going into the clinic. And they've now been charged. In fact, the last group was about 11 people, including an 87-year-old great-grandmother. And it's sort of like we really feel a lot safer here in America now that this 87-year-old great-grandmother is facing an 11-year sentence in federal prison.
Yeah, oh, she would have been better off to go and loot a store or something, and she probably would have got a slap on the wrist with a wet bus ticket and sent home.
Or she could have clocked somebody from behind with a haymaker punch or a sledgehammer or something, and it would have been okay.
Yeah,
She would have been
crazy.
on. You know, you see these videos of these people in New York; they're getting like just brutally attacked in the subway or on a street. There was a guy in a little bodega convenience store in Harlem, I think, and a guy came and started attacking him, and the guy picked up a knife and stabbed him and killed him, and he got charged with second-degree murder. And there was a huge outcry, and so eventually the charges were dropped. But if the guy had stabbed him and killed him who was robbing the store, and he was charged, he would have been out on bail before the guy made it to the clinic to see if he was still alive or dead.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all topsy-turvy,
so everything is
isn't
upside
it?
down. So the justice system has really been weaponized here in the United States. There's just no doubt about it.
Yes. It's definitely, and I mentioned to you off air how, with the CV restrictions, like you still cannot, as if you haven't had the pinprick serum as a foreigner, you can't get into the United States still, whereas New Zealand has dropped all of the pandemic-based restrictions. Even Canada's dropped their border restriction, but America is still hanging on to that and the vestiges of all of that. You know, I don't want to say too much to get this video banned. That's why I'm being very careful choosing my words. But you can't get into America as if you hadn't had the pinprick serum as a foreigner. I can't get into America still, whereas, say, New Zealand, we've dropped absolutely everything. There's no restrictions on anything, you know, that the pandemic introduced. So what is going on with America holding on to that, I don't know. Just one slightly thing on that, which I don't want to go down it too much, but I take it you would have seen that, the articles about how that in Boston, they developed an 80% kill rate strain of the CV. So we're talking GOF there. Why on earth, after what we've seen, why on earth these people should be even dabbling in that is insane. And yet there's no outcry about the GOF of the virus. But there sure is a big outcry about anything to do with, the things that you've talked about, or guns, for example. Just looking at news and stuff in America, it does seem everything's extremely topsy-turvy. But as you were talking about the various things about the energy and all that, and then I'm thinking about these things, and then I see an article this morning about a 15-year-old in Liverpool who suddenly dropped dead, and that's becoming the norm. But of course you can't say, but it's pretty obvious something changed from 2020, 2021, 2022, that there are suddenly so many unexplained deaths, adult death syndrome and so on, which anybody with half a brain should be able to put two and two together. But of course you can't on YouTube because you get the video banned still. But to put this with the energy, sorry, just where I'm going somewhere, John, with all the energy stuff you're talking about, then you've got the Ukraine situation, and I'm thinking all of these things, it shouts depopulation to me, and an agenda of the elites in that direction. And again, I guess we've got to be careful how we say things, but yeah. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, I can't, we don't always agree on some of these things, but I do think there's something going on. I read a lot of different publications and think tanks and that type of thing, a lot of which are very globalist oriented, just because I want to know what those people are thinking or doing or planning. And there was one from the Atlantic Council. And I have somebody who listens to me who has a relative who works for the Atlantic Council, and I was reading one of their papers from a number of years ago. It was a very interesting topic. It was called "Ukraine could feed the world." Ukraine could feed the world.
Yeah.
And Ukraine has incredibly rich soil. They really, when you start to run the numbers, and you would apply proper management to that, Ukraine really could impact the food situation around the world. And it's essentially been shut down. And Russia produces a lot agriculturally. I don't know that it's very high quality stuff, but they have, of course, what is it? At least 1/10, if not more, 1/6 of the world's surface, land surface, is under control of Russia in one country. So they could feed a lot of people, but the war has that shut down. So you had this impact on the food situation worldwide. I think the UN report that tracks this says that there are 100 million additional people this year at great risk of going into famine or being in famine than there were just a year. Excuse me. Than there were just a year ago. That's a pretty incredible shift in numbers, and the situation may be worse than we even think. We haven't seen much. We've seen sort of pockets of supply chain disruption in terms of food here in the United States. But I'm also doing some reading about, sort of macro issues on the food thing. And there have been tens of millions of poultry, birds and pigs and that type of thing that have had to be slaughtered because of disease and that sort of thing. And eventually that's going to have an impact. The old campaign slogan from back in the days of the Depression, "A chicken in every pot." Is that going to make an appearance again? Because people are concerned about food, and I know people that are already rationing. But I know with the cost of everything in the UK and other places, they are actually families. I mean, I see story after story, BBC, Times of London, that type of thing, about people are deciding, do I feed my kids or do I pay my utility bill? And then you had Liz Truss, who came in, and I'm not sure that Liz was on board with the sort of globalist reset agenda. She seems to be part of it, but I don't think she was fully on board with it. And she's gone in 45 days.
That's interesting, because Jeremy, the ex-32nd degree Freemason that I know and have on the show occasionally, he said to me, he sent me a message saying he'd heard, like, not long after she was elected, he said, "You watch, she's not going to be in office very long, and she'll be gone." And so he said, "Mark my words, basically, you watch, this will happen." And that was correct. So
I think he was probably correct. I mean, so I'm not sure exactly why. I don't know all the ins goings, and then they were initially talking just 2 days ago about, well, maybe Boris Johnson will come back.
Yeah.
But then Boris Johnson withdrew last night. So now Sunak has been elected the head of the Conservative, the Tories. And he's Asian, ethnic Asian, which now you have the mayor of London, who's a Muslim, and now you have an ethnic Indian, who's going to be the prime minister, the youngest one ever in at least several hundred years. It's just also very, very strange, and how quickly it all happens and the changes happen.
Yeah.
So now we have, you have elections in Israel coming up, and nobody knows what's going to happen there. In the UK, one of the reasons that Liz Truss resigned was that if she had faced a no confidence vote in Parliament and lost, they would have had an election. But if she resigns, then the Tories get to continue to try to make their government until there's a no confidence vote. So that's why Boris Johnson resigned. That's why Liz Truss resigned. And how long is this Sunak guy going to last? I don't know. It's I was doing a lot of research today as I'm preparing for some talks next year that I'll be giving. on the Great Reset and that type of thing. And there were a lot of things. I don't know how to say this, because when you talk about these end times thing, if you come up with a view or you talk about a view that somebody doesn't agree with, then you really get lambasted all over the place about it, And I'm sort of open to how this is going to go. I know there's an Islamic Antichrist theory, and there's other different theories in Western Europe and Macron and all these other ones. But today, as I was researching this, I was kind of shocked. I think I knew this, but I was kind of shocked as to how much of this Great Reset thing and the green agenda that we're facing in the world has come from the former Prince of Wales, who is now King Charles III.
Yes.
I don't know what to make of that, but it's something that I'm going to be looking into more. But I went back and there's a whole web page on the World Economic Forum website that is dedicated to Prince Charles as they kicked off the Great Reset and the climate thing. And he's been one of the biggest proponents of this. And this is governing everything. It's something that's totally divorced from the facts. I was reading some today about this. So California has wildfires. California also has a bunch of leftist environmentalists in charge. And this has been going on for some time. So if you take all of the carbon emission reductions done by California over the last 20 years, the wildfires this year in California emitted more than the carbon savings from 20 years.
Interesting. Yeah.
And there was also a report that China's announced that they're going to be doing more coal-fired energy production because of needs in their country. And that is like 20,000 times the carbon savings that people have been trying for under our Inflation Reduction Act and our Green Energy Act that was enacted here in the United States. What they're going to do is 20,000 times more emissions than, and so it's all, what it shows you is that this green energy thing is not about green energy.
No, it's about control.
It's about control.
Yes. Totally.
And that's a thing. So I know we're sort of running short on time. I'll just say one more thing. I don't know if you saw the clip the other night. I would highly recommend that you find it. It's pretty easy to find. Xi Jinping of China became essentially the new Mao, the emperor for life yesterday. But at the party Congress, it was either on Friday or Saturday, they had everybody in the room, and all the elites are in the front row. And then you had like row after row, bank of desks and tables behind them in the Great Hall of the People. And of course, everybody behind the elites was masked for the most part. I mean, I think I saw one or two that weren't. And there were hundreds of them. But sitting next to Xi's left was his predecessor as the president of China and the head of the Chinese Communist Party. And during he was getting close to where he was supposed to get up to speak. And the word was he was going to say some things that were a bit critical of Xi. And all of a sudden, two or three men came up behind him and said, "You need to come with us." And it's a very chilling thing. They come and get this guy. This guy was the president of China. He was the head of the CCP just before the guy is now.
Right.
So 10 years ago, he was the head of the CCP. And they escorted him out. It was clear that he did not want to go. And the thinking is that, and nobody in the whole, go look at the clip and watch all the people in the room. Nobody looks at the guy. It is like he's immediately removed from society and memory when they come to get him.
Wow.
It is chilling, Tony. It is absolutely chilling to watch. And as the guy is being escorted out, he reaches out to Xi and sort of touches him on the shoulder, and Xi just nods his head and turns away. And the thinking is that this man will never be seen again. And he didn't want to go because he knows what's going to happen. This is the world that we live in.
Yeah.
And I just think that, as Christians, we know that, the Bible says we're going to be persecuted and that type of thing. And in the West, we've largely had we've been free of that for a long, long time. And maybe that time is coming to an end. And so then what's the response to that? There are a lot of scriptural admonitions, Paul discusses the whole thing in Ephesians chapter 6. He acknowledges that, listen, it's not a physical battle. This is a spiritual battle between, the forces of good and the evil forces of darkness that are opposed to God. And that's really the battle that we're in. And so Paul says, armor up, put on the whole armor of God. And then in Romans chapter 16, he says, listen, act like men. Act like men, stand up for the truth. And we know that as Christians, that regardless of what the world will do to us, we know where our ultimate destination is, and that's to be with the Lord. So we have to keep that in mind. But, I do think we have to stand up for principles and what's right and call this stuff out. But I just think that we're sort of entering, I'm trying to be sober-minded about this. I think we're entering a very difficult time for the church in terms of the physical world part. We got to remember that we've won, the spiritual battle's been won, and we always need to focus on that.
Well, that's very true, yes. And people need to, first and foremost, have salvation through Jesus Christ. And if you don't know him as your Lord and Saviour, I suggest right now, people, that you get serious about researching and finding out the truth and giving your life to Jesus.
And sharing the gospel with others is important too if you're a Christian, because we don't know exactly where. Well, we don't know. Listen, here's the example. This guy was 10 years ago the most powerful man in China. Can't remember his name. He was erased over the weekend. I'm sure that he went to that meeting totally oblivious to the fact that this could happen.
Yeah.
And now he's gone. So we need to understand that we're at this time in human history where you can't put off deciding what you're going to do with Jesus Christ, because you don't know what's going to change. Listen, there's the threats coming out of Russia and the Ukraine that there could be nuclear war. This is a fact. There are reports, credible reports that I saw today, that for the first time since World War II, the United States elite troops, the 101st Airborne, have now been moved to Germany or been moved into Europe. Now, why is that? That's an earth-shattering fact. And so, listen, folks, when you hear a preacher or somebody say, now is the time, today is the day of salvation, you better believe it, because you don't have a lot of time. So if you've never accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, now's the time, because you can't put it off a week, a day, a month, a year. There's just not that time anymore. There's a sense of urgency now, really unlike anything we've seen in many, many decades in the world. So that's what I would leave you with.
Yep, totally agree.
I'm fine with where I'm fairly. I don't sit around worried and that type of thing. Okay, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that the Lord has the Lord has me. And that's ultimately what we need.
Totally. Yes. Thanks, John. Listen, just
Thank
before
you,
you go, can you just tell our listeners where they find you online?
Yeah, you can. Right now, we're still on YouTube. Fellowship Bible Chapel is our YouTube channel, or just Google my name on YouTube, John Haller. Also, we're on Rumble, Real FBC. I also put my prophecy updates up on RTN TV. There's an app for that there. And then we also have a Fellowship Bible Chapel app. So I suspect that we'll be moving more to the app in the weeks and months ahead, just because of the constant threat of censorship that we get from the big boys over there at where.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you, John. That's been a very interesting discussion, and yeah, hopefully we'll be back to do another one soon. It's always good to have these chats, and I always learn a lot from what you share. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony. God bless.
God bless. And folks, make sure that you subscribe to minute2midnight.com. Go down the right-hand side of the page and enter your email address where it says subscribe to blog. Also, A Minute to Midnight is run 100% by donations. Would really appreciate your help at this time if anyone's able to. It's always massively appreciated when people donate. We can't do this without your help. So if you are able to, you can donate at minute2midnight.com as well. And the music used in the shows I've written, played and recorded, and if you want to download some of my free music, you can find that at minute2midnight.com as well. So I should be back in a couple of days, hopefully, with another video. So, it's been a bit of a break, but there's a few should be lining up in the next week or two. So until then, God bless and stay safe.